G'day listeners and welcome back to another episode of the Keeper League podcast. We're the AFL Fantasy podcast that doesn't talk about the superstars. We only talk about the lesser knowns and the players who will bring value to your draft and Keeper League teams. My name's Heff and today I am joined by Aaron Bryans, commentator, presenter, ABC, SA Grandstand, and you call a bit on the national radio, don't you, on the commentary and stuff like that, is that right?
Yeah. We've had a pretty lucky draw this year considering how many primetime fixtures we've had. Sometimes you get stuck on the second game of a Saturday night or we call it off Broadway on the mid-afternoon Sunday game. But yeah, we've had a lot of national calls this year, which has been great based off, the Crows and the Powers form of last year. So, and
not even just like the time slots and things like that. How about the quality of games that you've had this year?
Amazing. I reckon 8 out of the 10 at Adelaide Oval have been thrillers. I was laughing with a friend that I was looking forward to Port Adelaide and Hawthorn purely to just have a nice, easy Sunday because we've had a ridiculous month of footy and it just didn't play out that way. So.
Yeah, no, it was a bit of a crazy game in the end. 2 goals in the last 2 minutes to win the game, but I'm sure everyone's seen the result already and as completely mystified as I am as to how Port Adelaide got out of jail. I was listening to the call last week and just something a bit funny. I was listening to the call last week and you introduced Josh Franco and then Rod Jamieson. And Rod Jamieson said, thanks, g'day Josh, and then g'day Aaron, sorry, and you've completely forgot your name.
Worked together for a good 5-6 years.
So I'm calling out Rod Jamieson here for the utter disrespect shown to South Australia's premier radio presenter,
He's such
commentator.
A good man, Jamo, as well. He looks after me all the time. But
who does he think he is? Like a Crows team of the decade player or something like? Forgetting someone like Aaron Bryans' name.
Pulling back the curtain a little bit. The role that I've had has obviously I've had predecessors before me. And, I still get texts sometimes on the show where people say, "Oh, hi, Joel," who was the guy who used to do the job before me like 5 years ago. So people don't forget their favourite commentators. And, you always get called somebody else every now and again.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. But still, I wasn't happy with the disrespect shown. So I thought I'd call out Rod Jamieson on this podcast. I'm sure he's listening right now. But anyway, how's the spreadsheet Keeper League going? How's your team going?
Yeah, not too bad. I've had a bit of a transitional period this year where I'm still contending, but my forward line's had a pretty dramatic shift. I had Tom Hawkins for so long, and he's kind of faded away. But I had Ollie Henry ready to go, so he's kind of my next big thing. Josh Dunkley as my tacklers had a great year as well, and I had Tristan Sherry, who's finally come into his own. So the ruck situation's gotten a lot better because I had him and Matt Flynn, who obviously died early. So it's been an all right year in our Keeper League. It's been probably the closest it's been ever. So we usually have like a mid-season pick for a side that's 9th and 10th. That's a fair few wins away from the rest, but we're about separated by 4 points, I reckon, the whole league.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
It's crazy.
Ours is quite similar, actually. I think the top 2 teams are 2 games ahead, like on even points. And then I think the top 4 or the next few are decided by another couple of games or something like that as well. So I think, like, we were talking about it on our group chat this morning, how much fluctuation there has been in scoring or, like, good games, bad games from players. Like, if you're a player that if someone owns like Bont or Tim English, you're getting one good week, one shit week type thing, and it really like flips your scoring and stuff like that.
I'm sure we'll probably mention it across the pod, but Dane Zorko, what is going on there? Like, I think a lot of people wouldn't have picked him in most draft formats purely because he was older and injury prone, and from a classic perspective, it's almost like he is must-have now, and he's too expensive to get.
He is too good for this podcast, far too good for this podcast. But like, there's a few things on him though. Like, I was offered him in a trade earlier on in the year, like pre-season. I said, no way, that guy's snapping hammy round 2 and he's finished. Like, he's retiring and then this year.
They've got so many big names in the middle. Why would he get a go there?
100%. So there was that. Roy, when I was on the traders earlier on this year, he was like, "Oh, who do I keep? Do I keep Angus Sheldrick or do I keep Dane Zorko?" Luckily, I convinced him to keep Dane Zorko, but I was thinking like Sheldrick could come on.
He had a good pre-season.
Exactly.
It's been a weird year for the top end guys that have kind of come out of nowhere. And Aruba Primos have been a bit hit and miss, haven't they?
Exactly. So yeah, it's been a bit of a crazy year, and might talk about some late outs and stuff like that. But they're more classic related, and I'm pissed off with my classic side at the moment, so I might not even talk about it. But anyway, just want to thank Game Day Squad for sponsoring the podcast. Huge supporters of this show, and many things that we do wouldn't be possible without them. If you haven't done so already, download the app, sign up with Game Day Squad, and once you've done that, click the link in the podcast description below this episode to add your team name to the spreadsheet, and I spin a wheel each week and read out a name, and this week's winner is Dunny's Destroyers. So well done to Dunny's Destroyers. It's the Dunny, if I think is the DT Talk writer. Dunny's been around for years, so I reckon that's the guy. He's an Adelaide boy and Port supporter.
Bit of nepotism there.
So yeah, definitely. So that's a good win by Dunny there. Get in contact with me and I will send you the code for round 10. Anyways, let's get stuck into the round review. So we started off on the Thursday night, Gold Coast Suns versus Geelong Cats. Full disclosure, didn't watch this game. I went to see the official band of AFL Fantasy, I would say, Luca Brasi.
Oh, I love that, yeah. Warnie's favourite.
Warnie's favourite. The T-shirt always seems to feature on the Traders podcast. We actually went to see them the night before the grand final in Melbourne, do their acoustic show. And let's just say it was a pretty loose night. I think
it's the vibes I get.
I think I started drinking at the grand final parade earlier in the day, and I think the show was at about, and that started about 10, and I think the show was at about 10 o'clock they started. So it was a long day for me, and yeah, let's just leave it at that. So didn't watch this one, but I'm hoping you saw some of it.
Thankfully I did, yeah, so I can fill you in a little bit.
Awesome. So let's start with Alex Sexton. The whole sexy back thing, 126 points. Is he back and can he hold his spot? That's more what I'm worried about. So in your classic formats, he's obviously going to be a player that you're trading in because he's got some cash rise, low break even, all that sort of stuff. But in our draft formats, we're worried about the rest of the season. Will Powell obviously out at the moment. What are your thoughts? Can he hold his spot?
I think he can, yeah. So the issue, I guess, earlier in the season was they had a plethora of players they could use in that role of halfback, and he just wasn't as damaging as others. And we kind of saw that with Zach Fisher to an extent at North, that Clarkson got frustrated with how little impact he was kind of having. Makes him the sub, everyone jumps off from a classic perspective, and now all of a sudden he's right back. And it's the same with Alex Sexton, sent back to the twos, just couldn't find a way back in. The willpower suspension, so all the way out till round 15, has to have some time to work back into that as well. So it's probably not going to be forever from an Alex Sexton perspective, but there's going to be other injuries around that.
Yeah.
At the moment, he's in this squad. Maybe later in the year he becomes more of a sub-risk, but yeah, the potential is mega. And the game in itself in Darwin, obviously Geelong were leaking points. It was hot footy. They were going to the cool room every single quarter break, and the Suns were staying out. They were almost a mental flex.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was amazing. So I think the high ceiling that he had, we know you're not going to get 120 every week, but it's the Alex Sexton that we saw across the preseason.
Yeah.
A guy that's rotating off halfback. He's taken Will Powell's role. He'll comfortably hold that until he's available for selection once again. And because Powell's been out for such a long period of time with that suspension, maybe he goes back to the twos for a bit, and it just gives Sexton a good month of footy to find himself and show Hardwick what he can do. So I don't mind it as a quick little pickup. The difficult part, I guess, from a keeper and a draft perspective is there's going to be a lot of comps that don't play through the buys, and maybe by the time the buy rounds are over, he's lost all of his scoring value. So I don't mind jumping on it now. Just be prepared that if you're in one of those leagues where you're not playing over the next 4 weeks, by the time you start up again, it's going to be treacherous with Powell now available.
Yeah, that's what more was my thinking. But I do think he's performing too well to probably be dropped anytime soon, really, especially with Powell out. The one thing that fills me with a bit more confidence is that his VFL form leading into this kind of stint, the Powell opened the door, obviously, but his VFL form was huge coming into this game. So he kind of earned his spot again as well, and I think he's done a lot of, he's in Dim's good books at the moment, I think, as well. So
yeah, that definitely helps. I want to have a quick look at the lineup as well, I guess, in terms of their bench players for that. So Bodie Hewland, and David Swallow, obviously he's more mid forward, but towards the back end of his career. So I guess the concerning part for Damien Hardwick, depending on where the Suns are in a month, is looking ahead, and Powell would obviously be the priority over a Sexton, but in terms of that bench depth there, I can't see why Sexton couldn't hold his spot, even as the rotation in of halfback.
Was Joel Jeffrey playing in this game?
Yeah,
and he was on the halfback.
So
halfback pocket. So there's another one that probably would go out before he does as well. So there's probably a few in there that he could hold his spot.
When he first got omitted, it seemed like a shock, to be honest. Yeah, he had a bad game the round before he was dropped, which I reckon was 3.
It coincided with Flanders going back, and then Will Powell was on the other one. So
but it felt like his form before that. To have one bad game and then miss so much footy as a result of it felt a little harsh.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
To have him back in the 22 and firing, I'm pretty confident, at least over the next month, that he keeps that role and has that high ceiling to continue.
Yep, no, agree. All right, let's move on. So Bailey Humphries, I'm not going to talk about this one too much, but kicked 5 goals, scored 101 points. Not going to do that every week, but it's just a good sign for the future with a young player like him who does seem to be more of that mid-forward type. Jack Lukosius was kind of the same, like 90 points, 5 goals. What do you think about him playing forward, though? Is the role as nice for fantasy, or is it a bit
Probably
aggressive?
not. Like, he's not scoring 5 goals every week, and Ben King's probably still going to be the main target. But the one thing I've always liked about Lukosius is he's so flexible to get around the ground. So at his best, he can push up to that wing and find the footy. You're right, in terms of a fantasy perspective, the halfback role is much more fruitful.
Yeah.
But he doesn't like playing there. He wants to be up forward. So I think part of the incentive of staying, considering the South Australian clubs have come asking, is probably, hey, this is the job I want and I'd like to play in this role. So I still see him and kind of King as the twin towers up forward for the Suns moving forward.
And Dimmer has said it was a mistake to put him back again as well, so I just don't see him going
He's
back
got that
on
flexibility as well. So if they do have a game like similar to the weekend with Port and Hawthorn where you kind of want to set up a wall and hold a lead, he could do that. So you can, rotate him however you please. But from a fantasy perspective, you probably want to look at him as a forward because that's where he's predominantly going to be.
Yeah, still worth owning, I think, with the forward status. And for those games he does pop up and, I had an opponent this week who had him on field, scored 90 points. Like, it was fine for him. So, yeah, still a worthy option in keeper leagues, I think. Lloyd Johnston scored 89 points. I have no idea who this guy is.
Neither did I 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It was totally random, but he was the water boy for the Suns a few years ago.
No way.
And ended up being picked up as a Category B rookie. And, he had a massive game on the weekend. His first one was very quiet, understandably, because he's essentially come from nowhere as a young, promising talent and been given a go. But Hardwick loves him.
Yeah,
It's a ripping story of kind of hardship to get where he's got to. And, a really impressive game. So maybe one to just keep an eye on to see if he can back it up. If he's getting, 60, 70 plus this weekend, maybe he is a handy kind of depth player to bring in depending on how deep your league is.
Yeah, might be an option in your classic formats as well if he's got a low break even after that performance. Ned Moyle, 82 points. What do you think do you think he's a successor to Jared Witts once he goes, or do you think they fast track Ethan Reid? What's your take on that? Because they're playing Reid as a bit of a key forward.
I still think Reid is going to be the guy. It sounds from all reports that Ned Moyle will find a new home, but it's going to be pretty easy for him to do that because he's such a talented ruckman. So in a keeper perspective, hold him because he dominates hit-outs and he's starting to form what is more of that modern ruckman who can find disposals, take marks around the ground, which is kind of, your Marshalls, your English and your Gawns. So I really like him, but I don't see him staying at the Gold Coast. I think that the plan is to get him out of there. Maybe a Crows could look at him possibly, considering that Riley O'Brien isn't that modern ruckman right now. But I feel like Witts into Reid is the succession plan. Yep,
no, I feel that's the case as well. And, Ethan Reid should be a decent fantasy option when he gets that role. It's just, when it comes about and how long Witts has got to go, I guess. While we're on the topic of ruckman, we'll flip over to Geelong now. There's not much to talk about, but Toby Conway, every time he plays, he impresses me.
He's so good.
Scored 94 points on the weekend. Do you think that they just stop bringing Reece Stanley and flipping the ruckman around and just go with Conway full-time?
Yeah, a bit of insider knowledge here on this one. So Cameron Link's part of the ABC Sport crew and has been pretty open about the pathway for Toby Conway. So dominated in the VFL for years and Chris Scott absolutely loves him.
Yep.
It was just a matter of getting him in and around, I guess, where Geelong were currently sitting, not to throw him in too early when they're contending. The plan was in round 9 to actually essentially pass the torch. So Stanley was going to come out, Toby Conway was going to come in, and he was going to be the number one ruck moving forward. And I think he got the flu or something, and they decided to manage him, so he didn't play VFL, he didn't play senior footy. Finally got the go this past weekend. So I think from here on out, it's Toby's kind of team. And there'll be times where Stanley comes in to give him a chop out maybe every fourth game. To make sure they don't overload him. And Geelong's very good at that, at managing its superstars and giving them time to develop. But he's done the hard yards. He's been there for a few years now. He's been waiting for his opportunity. And he wins so many hit-outs. In the VFL, he was getting, 40, 50 a game.
Yeah.
He's not going to obviously get that ceiling consistently at the AFL level, but seeing him and Moyle match up on Thursday, you got, 2 future stars in terms of rucks, guys that we'll be talking about in, 4 or 5 years' time as hopefully the next big 2. So Conway's one, if he hasn't been picked up in your league, do it because he is their number one ruckman now.
I think there's a few Toby Conway owners out there that are going to be pretty happy to hear that piece of information as well. Hopefully he can stay for the rest of the season. Sydney Swans versus Carlton, moving on to Friday night. Again, not a heap to talk about in this one. Hayden McLean had 98 points. I think it's more just a tip of the cap. Forward and the second kind of ruck option gets a few hit outs. I think he kicked a goal to pad his stats. Matthew Kennedy, we keep coming back to him because, started the year in the forward line, now playing in the midfield. I think he was the sub a few weeks ago, but he got the forward status, scored 97 points on the weekend. Like, he's probably too good for the podcast given on how he's scoring, because the last 3 out of 4 games he's scored over 80, and he had that 15, but he was the sub that week. What are your thoughts in terms of their midfield? I think there was an article on afl.com.au saying that the Carlton midfield are really lacking at the moment, or they need some more support. Do you think he plays a part in that? Do you think
he has been? That's the thing. Yeah. So 3 of the last 4, he's had 67% or higher in his CBAs. So he's getting an injection kind of out of nowhere, as he touched on early on. He was very much a depth player who was starting forward and occasionally rotating in. And I think it's come at the expense of George Hewitt a little bit. His past few weeks, he was the sub and then really poor on the weekend. So I think they're just trying to figure out what to do with that fourth midfielder. Chera obviously missed with a hamstring. He'll be back in a few weeks. But it's still kind of Cripps, Walsh, Chera, and then that fourth, almost Ollie Wines kind of role.
Yeah.
Maybe it's Matthew Kennedy's world now, and George Hewitt's the guy who's going to be either the sub or the guy off the bench, who I think the two of them have always battled it out for that possible opportunity to go 80 plus. And the other ends up being 50, 60. And right now, Kennedy's kind of winning out.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, yeah, too good for the podcast based on scoring. I'll give it to him. But I think there's still something to rethink maybe when Chera comes back as well, and how they actually decide to structure their midfield over the next few weeks. Because, yeah, it's clear that something's not going right for Carlton, whatever they're doing right now, and they might need to, make some changes going forward as well. The only other one is Mark Pitnet, 79 points. Just want to highlight that ever since he's come in, he's taken everything away from Tom De Koning, and all the things that people were getting excited about. There were coaches out there. The Silvani
injury helps that to an extent as well.
Yeah.
I think they would love Tom De Koning to be more of a ruck.
That's true.
They need that forward option. Yeah. So Pitnet's the guy.
Yeah, maybe Tom De Koning's a buy low for next year in your keep leagues when Silvani does come back. Onto the Collingwood versus Adelaide game. Let's get your thoughts on the run too far at the end of the ground. How many steps was it? Was it the right call?
I was always pretty confident that it was the right call. I know it's an inconsistent call, but it was, in the moment, he'd taken the bounce at centre wing and it ended up at the attacking edge of the square. And I immediately messaged our ABC group chat and kind of said, look, centre square's 50 metres. So he's basically run 25 and it ended up being 24.2. So there was massive vindication. I was stoked with that. But frustrating for Crows fans. They've had 4 decisions over the last 2 years go against them in tight games. And my argument to that is they're in those positions because they're still not quite good enough to match it with the best anyway.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make it any better as a fan knowing that you could have nabbed a pretty big win and you've lost an opportunity to.
I think for Crows fans, though, the positive signs are there that you're getting within these big clubs.
It's just that this year's a bit of a stagnant year. Yeah. Like they're hopefully going to take the next step. Next year, I mean, the reports today are that there's a big money offer for Elliot Yeo coming through.
Crazy.
So I don't mind that complementing their midfield.
Yeah.
So, yeah, from a Crows perspective, I think they're on their rise. The Rankin injury is very frustrating, though, from that play to do his hamstring and be out 3 weeks, because he was on a roll in terms of his champion data ratings, and from a fantasy perspective, that carried over as well. He was scoring quite comfortably in a very limited option forward line.
Well, on that topic, I think we've got to make Rankin too good for the podcast if we hadn't made him already, because, it's just a pity he's done that string. I'm not sure the severity of it, but, he'll be back fit and firing.
They reckon about 3 weeks, so after the bye.
Yeah, I feel for Dossie. That was his unique pick in his Supercoach team. He was going pretty well.
I actually just got him in Supercoach.
Oh, no. So, there's a few out there.
Right there.
Damn, that sucks. We'll look at Collingwood real quickly, but Jack Crisp had 118 points. So now officially too good for the podcast because he's had those 3 big scores. What are your thoughts with Mitchell being out at the moment? Do you think he even comes back in, Tom Mitchell? Or do you think they're more comfortable with Jack Crisp on the halfback line? Still Sidebottom's been playing on the halfback flank, so it's kind of forced a bit of a structure. What do you think Collingwood's ideal structure in terms with Jack Crisp and their midfield is, and maybe Mitchell potentially coming back in?
I still think they rotate that midfield through the year to get to September. And when you talk about the ideal combination, for me, Nick Dacos has to be in there, but at times they've opted against it. De Goey, I love him in terms of the electricity that he brings, the dash and the burst of energy. And Pendlebury at his best is amazing. But again, for his age, they're going to have to monitor that. So 93% time in the middle on the weekend. He's not going to have that every weekend because it just will burn him out. So Crisp will get minutes around what's happening because I think Tom Mitchell's best as a sub. Yeah. And he's going to get games where he'll play full game time to give someone else a chop out. But I think he's the last one in that line of superstars you just rattled off. And De Goey the last few weeks out through injury and then didn't get a single CBA on the weekend, that will change. So the big score from the weekend for Jack Crisp isn't going to be there consistently because I still think De Goey comes back into that mix at times. Yeah. So for me, it's De Goey, Dacos, Pendlebury. You can rotate a Mitchell or a Crisp through that after. Yeah, fair enough. I think Tom Mitchell owners would be pretty worried. It does seem like there's a bit of what I call the fossil rotation as well. Like Hoskin, Elliott, Pendlebury's been subbed out. Like there's been a bit of a rotation with a few of those older players as well, which probably doesn't bode well for in fantasy leagues when especially you don't play loopholes or anything like that. It can be a bit tricky when players are getting subbed out. The other one for the Crows, Luke Nankervis. I've got 79 points here, but I think it was more than that in the end. But for me, he just looks like a fantasy type. I think he took quite a few marks in that game. A few of those were contested as well. Who do you think, is he the guy that would replace Brodie Smith long term, do you think? I love this kid. I'm surprised every time I see him. He's going to play his 12th game on the weekend. For me, he feels like a 20-30 at least kind of gamer. I think he debuted against Collingwood last year, didn't he? He's got just so much composure for a kid and understands that halfback role very well, which is you've got to have a burst of speed off the line. You've got to be damaging and penetrating with your kick down the wings, and he's got all of that. So I really like his potential for a guy that's only played 11 games. And, he got 87 in the end on the weekend. I reckon it was a career-high 11 marks. So he's building slowly. For me, he's a 60s, 70s guy right now, but hopefully next year he pushes into, the best of a Jack Crisp or what we're seeing a little bit out of Josh Worrell before he got injured. He can be an 80-plus kind of player. Yeah, I've got him on my rookie list in my keeper league, so that means I've got 2 years of him for free. So pretty happy with that one. Let's move on to the Giants versus the Western Bulldogs. What do you think's going on with the Giants right now? I don't know. I haven't honestly seen a lot of their games the last few weeks because for me they were easily felt like a Sydney kind of Giants derby grand final. And I don't know what's happened the last few weeks for them to fall away. Like the Cornelio was injured for a bit. Now Josh Kelly's out. But he was more of an outside guy, not as damaging as what they've seen. I'm not entirely sure. Toby Green's had a really off year, just not as damaging as he normally can be. Hasn't the scoreboard as comfortably. So I'm not quite sure what the turnaround has been. I've got to put a spotlight on them, to be honest, this weekend because we've got to figure out what's going on there. Yeah, definitely. I've got no idea. I didn't get to see too much of this game. The Twilight games are always difficult for me. But we'll move on to some players. Nick Haynes, 115 points. He's on the bubble for Too Good for the Podcast. He just kind of floats across that halfback flank, takes grabs. I've been saying on the podcast for a few weeks, I completely disregarded his VFL form because I was just like, this guy's not going to come back in, come back into the senior team. But including his VFL numbers, I think he's had something like 4 or 5 last tons out of his last 5 games or something like that as well. The AFL, so this year, the 4 games he's played, 3 of them have gone 80 plus, so 80, 90 and 110. So, and we haven't really looked at Isaac Cumming yet either. He's been out injured for the whole year. So maybe he ends up holding that spot. Just one to keep monitoring. But if he scores like that again next week, the 80 plus is Too Good for the Podcast. The big one there is Ed Richards. So Geordie flagged him last week as the new Libber. I like it. 97 points on the weekend. Actually, I think he had 68 at half time. Bevo loves him. He's been trying to get him in that midfield mix all year. He's been kind of floating through and obviously at the expense of a Jack McRae. And now you're right, Libber out with the concussion indefinitely has kind of released the shackles to give him fully a go. And he's cashing in on it. So if you've got Ed Richards, you'd be pretty happy. He's pretty close to Too Good for the Podcast as well. I think it was particularly impressive that GWS generally, that midfield is pretty hard to score against in terms of fantasy points. And don't think anyone for the Dogs went over 100 in this game as well. So for Ed Richards to be the top scorer, if he comes up against a West Coast or North Melbourne or something like that, Geelong, could absolutely Geelong could give away points in the midfield. Absolutely feast. Or Richmond even. We'll talk about your Tigers in a second. Can we not? The other one's Sam Darcy as well. I think he's almost Too Good for the Podcast as well. 86 points. Just an amazing season he's having. I think we kind of knew being an early pick he was eventually going to be this good, but it was just a matter of when, and another kind of throwback to Bevo in the sense that playing so many different roles over the last year, floating down back, occasionally getting a go forward, and finally gets a proper crack at it, just kicking goals at ease every single week. The only downside, I guess, is I've looked at some of the numbers through the last couple of days. He's not going to get ruck status. Yeah. So he'll just stay forward now.
Do you think he's one of those players that benefits from going into the ruck, or do you think it hinders him, moving away from the goals and things like that?
It's a little bit of extra points, and he's good around the ground. Yeah. So, I don't mind it. But, his kind of biggest scores have been when he's had, 4 or 5 goals. So, you probably do want him to stay forward as much as you can.
Yeah, that's my thoughts. I used to love the idea of the ruck forward, but now I'm thinking they're better off staying forward the more I look into
Luke
it.
Jackson.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. But maybe not the case there. St Kilda versus Fremantle, speaking of, not a lot to talk about here either. I think it's just getting to that stage of the season where we've kind of unearthed all the players we need to talk about. But Josh Battle's been playing forward the last few weeks, but he's gone back in defence this week and still had 87 points. So I think he's just taking grabs and, I don't know, what do you think?
I like a good swingman, He can play multiple roles and find the footy, especially in a St Kilda lineup that's so stagnant with its ball movement that if he is able to get around the ground and do multiple things, that certainly helps his viability, because if you're stuck in defence at the Saints, sometimes it's easy with your +6s, but you're not really imposing yourself on a game at all, are you?
No, not really. What are your thoughts on Matthew Johnson? So 84 points. Saw him used as like an inside mid more last season when Fife was out of the team. Fife's come back and it's kind of pushed him out to a wing. They've got someone like Nathan O'Driscoll, I think, who's not far away from playing, who's an outside type that I think they want to experiment
and Neil Erasmus, where has he gone? He's just
in the Waffle, he's putting up huge numbers though as well. So, I don't think they played on the weekend. I think there was a state
first
game.
Round pick that kind of been waiting to finally break through.
So. But I think he's had back-to-back big scores in the Waffle as well. So there's a few players like that. What are your thoughts on him? Does he have upside, Matthew Johnson?
I think so. Yeah, he's young. He's scoring well. The issue, I guess, is that Fremantle's midfield as a whole is so young. So Sarong, Brayshaw, and Young are going to be there for indefinitely. Yeah. Probably the next 6-7 years. So
Fife's the one that leaves the gap. But is he the next inside guy, or do they roll with someone else, or do they try an Erasmus?
I'm not entirely sure. I think they've got a lot of options at least, which is handy. I guess for Matthew Johnson's sense, he's not too bad when he does rotate forward a little bit. So I guess that maybe that's to his detriment from a fantasy perspective, because maybe Erasmus can't do that.
Yeah.
I think they've played Erasmus on the outside a fair bit sometimes when he has been given a go. So. Switkowski is the other one. He's a tackling machine who applies a lot of pressure when he's put in. So he's been out at the moment. But, there's a couple of options to kind of take that fourth spot.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix with Fremantle. And it's like one you can't really, if you've got a crystal ball, I'd love to tell you the answer to it. But, we just have to wait and see how that one actually pans out. We're kind of getting halfway through the round review, so I'll just take the time to thank some gold members. Just firstly, huge thank you to all the members, or the new people that have signed up during the week. There's been a handful of new members sign up, hearing the call. Because, it's honestly, this podcast doesn't go ahead without members signing up to support it, because it's the only reason I can find the time to actually do this week in, week out, and do all the content that's associated with it. So just a huge heartfelt thank you to those people that have signed up. And I've emailed quite a few of them as well personally, just to say thanks. But the first 15 gold members to read out, thank you to Aaron Timoney, Aaron Laslett, Tom Carey, Tom Seagram, Adam Lavaz, Evan Brumby, Ryan Daniels, Footy Rhino, what a legend. Brad Holland, who's a good mate of mine as well. Jared Hunter, Andrew Hutchin, Cam Fox, Echo, interesting name. Jason Miller, Matt Nash, Ben M, and Isaac Henry. Thank you so much to all those gold members who have signed up to support the show. All right, you said you wanted to avoid this part, but
here we go.
Look, Brisbane Lions versus Richmond. Did you watch it?
I saw bits of it.
Do you find it tricky to watch your team when they're in a state like this?
A little bit, but I'm also kind of conditioned to it.
Yeah,
it's a funny one that you have a short-term memory because Richmond had so much success in the late 2010s. But I grew up in the Terry Wallace era.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm very accustomed to Richmond being terrible and knowing kind of... But at least during that Wallace era, we were competitive, and I think we only had like one spoon during that time, whereas this feels like West Coast 2 years ago.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
It's still a little bit of a shock to me that there's so many injuries.
Yeah.
So they're basically playing with 29 active guys. So you're not getting your kids any game time because they're on the bench. The margins are so bad.
Yeah.
And then there's the rumblings of senior players getting offers elsewhere. And West Coast were like this a few years ago. And I guess we've got to learn from what their supporters went through and kind of just cop it on the chin, because I still kind of look back to 2017 when I was lucky enough to go to the grand final. Didn't think we'd win, and we got it.
Yeah.
And I just kind of said to all my friends, look, we never have to win another game again to experience this. And a lot of people don't. St Kilda fans haven't for a long time. Freo fans never have.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really awful kind of being a Richmond supporter right now because we're just terrible and miserable. But it's the highs and lows of football, right?
Absolutely.
It's not fun if you win all the time. I don't know what being a Geelong supporter would be like, but I think to have a hardship and then win a flag just makes it so much more better. So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I'm happy to ride this through.
Well, I think there's a couple takes on this. First one is like I attribute some of my funnest times at the footy is when like that 08 to 2012 period where Port were terrible because there's just zero expectations. You rock up, have a laugh about how shit you are, like talk to your mates about it. Especially like when we had that time we'd had a flag in the last like 5 years type thing, so it was about time to go through it. It ended up being a bit shitter than it probably was, but I still found it like still not a bad time to go to the footy. I think it's more frustrating when you should be winning and you're not winning. Like you think you've got a good team.
Well, we had a period there. Like 2018, 19, 20, where for so long I didn't know what it was like to be the favourite.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you kind of, you're on edge every single game because you're supposed to win, as you said. And I don't mind going in with no expectations sometimes and just hoping for the best.
I think it's worse being a top 4 team like Port have for the last probably 4 years, and then just not getting there.
Yeah.
Like, that's sometimes even worse, like a worse way Melbourne type thing as well, even though they did jag one. It's like
the glass half full aspect of that is Tassie's coming in 4 years' time.
That was my second point.
If you're bottoming out right now, as Hawthorn, West Coast, North and Richmond are doing, the hope is that you pick up the promising first rounders before you cannot.
Yep.
And then, the sides that are up top right now who fall away. I'm looking at lists like the Giants. I think they're going to have like Cornelio, Kelly will be gone by the time Tassie comes in.
Yeah.
And then they can't get picks to replenish them.
That's my greatest fear because we've given up so many first rounders to get, Horn France. And I think we even gave up a first rounder this year, I think, as well.
You don't have one coming up.
Yeah, exactly.
So
like
I think it's 3 years without a first round pick.
It's bloody scary with Tasmania coming in. Given how hard it was to even pick up players when we were bottoming out, when Gold Coast and Jet Hurst came in, and we still were only getting lucky to get Chad Wingard at pick 5 and things like that. So it's a scary time for those teams that are up at the top now, especially if you don't jag a flag. But anyway, on to the game itself. I don't think we can take too much out of this game in terms of scores, to be honest. I'm just going to say this, plain and simple. There's Richmond factor when you play Richmond.
When
now
you win by over
scoring.
100 points,
exactly.
Right? You're just dominating possession. So
Kyle Oman, 99 points, 5 goals. Had him on field in Supercoach this week, so pretty happy with that. But Darcy Wilmot, 96 points. Connor McKenna, 94 points. Jack Payne, even though he's
had a really off year, hasn't he?
But he did it last week, didn't he, as well, against Tex? He took a stack of marks on him as well.
He was much better.
Yeah.
And to build up to that, I remember doing in my prep, I thought, last year Jack Payne was pushing towards all Australian and how well he was with his intercept marking.
Yeah.
And he just hadn't seen that this year. Maybe that's a reason why Brisbane have been struggling a bit, that Harris Andrews has had to hold the load. But you're right, he was a lot better in the draw against the Crows and has backed that up this week.
Yeah, so he might be one to be looking at, but, we've seen so many key defenders put up back-to-back. Like Mark Keane earlier on the season was, scoring huge.
Yeah.
And then, he's been putting up 40s and 50s since. So, nothing to get too excited. I honestly can't pick anything out of this game. The best score for Richmond was Nankervis, just a real nothing game. The only thing you take out of it is just stream your players against the Tigers. Against Tigers. So you've got all your Essendon players. I've got Archie Perkins, Jai Caldwell. I think I've got another one in my team as well.
Zach Merritt needs a big score, so this could be the weekend for it.
Absolutely. So, if you got him, make him captain this week maybe. Essendon versus North Melbourne, speaking of the Bombers. Peter Wright, I'm just going to tip the cap against him. 115 points on the back of 4 goals. Probably not too much to talk about. The more interesting ones are players like Archie Perkins, 100 points. He's actually averaging 98 points when Darcy Parish doesn't play. So, even that said, though, he's showing signs of taking a leap at the moment. Do you think he becomes one of the elite kind of fantasy players going forward? Or?
I want him to be, because you're right. When he gets that opportunity, he grabs it pretty comfortably. And Durham didn't play as much in the middle because I think he hurt his shoulder during that game. So the issue with the Bombers that I have is they're very open and honest that they're trying to recruit a big-name midfielder.
Yeah.
When they've already got Merritt, Parish, Setterfield, Shield, and then Perkins and Durham trying to force their way in. Caldwell's on the outside.
Yeah.
They've got, and Hobbs isn't even getting time.
That's what I mean.
They've got so many midfield options and they're still trying to find another.
Yeah.
It just worries me about those kids because Durham I feel like he's their best midfielder.
Yeah, I think so too.
Zach Merritt's the game winner.
Yeah.
But Durham's the hard body who's, tackling, intense, forcing turnovers. I love Sam Durham.
Yeah.
I just want them to go all in on him.
Yeah, no.
And I'm not sure what Brad Scott is kind of thinking in terms of the depth around that midfield because they've got so many names and he just doesn't seem set on what it is.
If anything, they probably need another key forward role, like target up forward, if anything. But
because I like Darcy Parish as a player, but actually do find that when he's not in the side, they look a little better.
I agree. Yeah, definitely. So, interesting one. Archie Perkins. Watch to see what happens with Parrish this week. If he is out again and then Archie Perkins kind of takes over again, there could be a big score in the cards. Might be a round one type score from Archie Perkins. Matt Guelphy kicked 3 goals, scored 82 points. Like, he wasn't playing that tagging role, I don't think, this week. So, he's just more so one to watch when you've got like a halfback flanker type that is a ball winner. He'll probably nullify them, in terms of games. But it seemed like he wasn't actually playing the tagging role this week. And the other one is Charlie Comben, like just had back-to-back 70-plus scores. Plays that intercept role, like just maybe one to look at as a forward, although I wouldn't feel comfortable playing him each week. The bad thing about North is you never can stream them because they never get the primetime games earlier on the week.
No, I just wanted to have a check. So Griffin Logue's still quite a while away.
Yeah.
So he's probably still going to hold down that tall body down back for at least the next half of the year.
I think Clarko likes him too. And they've been kind of playing, like they spent the preseason kind of prepping him for this role because he used to play as a forward, obviously.
Well, there was that opportunity with Coleman Jones out to flip him back forward once again.
That's what I thought was going to happen.
They haven't pulled the trigger on it, so...
Nah, didn't happen. Moving on to probably the match of the round, Port Adelaide versus Hawthorn, which you were lucky enough to be in the commentary box for. A few players here. So Jason Horne-Francis, back-to-back 100-plus scores, but coincided with Rosie out. Wines came out of the game early. Do you think he can be more consistent from now on? Let's say Rosie comes back next week. Does he fall away again?
It's entirely up to Ken Hinkley, really. Yeah. And I'm not totally sold on it yet. I mentioned this the other day. I think that he reminds me of Caleb Sarong. Remember for a few years it felt like he was going to be the next big thing, but he just kept averaging 80 or 90. He was stuck around just underneath that Uber Premium mark. And a couple of years I went on him early, started with him thinking this was the year, and he just never took that step. And finally out of nowhere he just did. And then this year he's backed it up and gone even better. And Horne-Francis has all the makings. So when he's given a go, he puts that team on his back. He was the best player out there on Sunday.
Yeah.
He was the only one really fighting for all 4 quarters. Butters stood up at the end, but Horne-Francis was the one who was desperate the whole time.
Yeah, and I think, the sign is like other teams actually pay him attention. Like, and I find this really strange because this is kind of going off topic, but no one has tagged Sarong yet this season.
Weird.
Like, no one has really gone to him and shut him down
Considering,
properly.
Brayshaw's been more outside and wing to an extent.
So they've been going to Young and stuff like that. Like, it's a bit crazy. But Horne-Francis is in that similar mould. I think it's just a matter of time for him. Like,
the weird thing is, Horne-Francis is in their best midfield mix, as is Rosie and Butters. That's a very scary trifecta. But they don't play them together.
Yeah.
It's always Wines in or Drew in alongside 2 of them.
Yeah.
I get it to kind of spread the load and maybe make sure they're all damaging when they get their chances.
Yeah.
But maybe Ken Hinkley's kind of waiting till September to unleash them all together. But there's going to be a period of time.
To go all-out attack type thing.
It's just timing that run. There's going to be a period where he goes, yep, it's now, and Horne-Francis, the shackles are off and away you go. And he's a 100 averaging player as soon as he gets that. He just needs 60 to 70% midfield time, and he's away.
100%.
But I just don't have any confidence right now. Like, as you said, Rosie's coming back in, Wines will play on the weekend, and Ken Hinkley just hasn't kind of given him free rein as of yet.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It's just, you just got to wait. You just got to wait for him to, like, he's in his 3rd year now. He'll average over 80 this year probably.
Part of me hopes is, Ken pulls the trigger around round 20, and then heading into next year, we know what we're getting, and he's still going to be pretty affordable. Yeah,
hopefully that's the case. Travis Boak, I just want to flag, scored 107 points on the weekend, and credit to Geordie DeSena, who flagged this last weekend. He's starting forward a lot more. Really,
the percentages are in his favour.
Yeah,
he's
100%.
Probably going to get DPP.
Yeah, so that's the one. If he's in your waiver wire right now, or if like the coach who owns him isn't paying attention, they might want to sell high on him after 107 points or something like that as well. Definitely one to be paying attention to, because when he gets that forward status, it's going to be pretty handy, I think. And he won't be midfield all the time, but there will be injuries, there will be players rested, there will be bits and pieces going on.
In deep leagues where forward options are very limited, a 70s guy is great.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and he's going to be that guy. I think he's had 70s most weeks this year, so I think he's averaging around that mark, maybe even high 70s, 75-ish. Jace Burgoyne, 100 points on the weekend. I want to hear your thoughts on him, because he does seem to be the fantasy type, but is he a damaging player that Port would want to keep rolling out? What are your thoughts on him?
I've harped a bit on, was it Luke Nankervis earlier? But Jace Burgoyne, has my attention. 3 of his last 4 scores have been excellent. I know he had one bad game in the mix of that, but
showdown, I think it was.
The 2 wing spots were kind of up for grabs in the absence of Xavier Dersma heading into this year. Travis Boak pretty much had one, and then Burgoyne's kind of nabbed the other, and Miles Bergman kind of floats through. But what we traditionally are seeing is when Jace has the outside wing and Bergman's on the broadcast side, Bergman will float back to play the halfback role, and Jace is more of the attacker.
Yeah.
So which means he gets that outside ball out of stoppage. He's kicking inside 50 and he's taking marks in open territory. Like, he just runs a lot.
Yeah.
Gives me a little bit of kind of Clayton Oliver vibes, and he just finds little pockets to take a little 45 mark. Uncontested, moves the ball.
Yeah.
Like, he's very much the connector. And I really like him because he's so young. I think he's 20, and the potential is so high for this guy that he's shown us his ceiling very early.
Yeah.
It's probably not going to be there every single week, but if we're getting 70 plus from this guy right now, you'd want to invest.
I think the biggest issue is we're going to see probably mid-only next season, which
maybe
makes him a little bit less desirable, but it depends what happens with halfbacks and things like that. But that's the only flag.
Mid-only who's averaging 70, 80 could be like a Xavier Dersma, and you never really want to commit to that.
Correct. And I committed to Xavier Dersma for far too long, that's for sure. Kane Farrell, 93 points. He's always close to too good for the podcast. He's just taken a big step up in the kick-ins this year. It seems like, because he does have that super boot, they kind of give him the reins, and especially on a wet weather
Very
game.
accurate when he goes long.
They just want to boot it forward, so he seems to take them all at the moment. For the Hawks, not a lot to talk about. I guess we talk about Hardwick, but he's technically too good for the podcast.
And again, his role is just a little bit hard to judge.
Well, the guy he owns him in Ali didn't play him this week.
Yeah.
Just because of what he's been doing the last few weeks, and then goes forward, kicks 5.
You think going forward against Port Adelaide in a game that was supposed to get smashed, he shouldn't have scored what he did. So
the one thing I will say is, like, I back him in every time he's got a set shot. He's got an amazing kick. So that's the other thing.
And Sicily's coming back, like, maybe he stays forward, which probably does hurt his scoring. I know he kicked 5 and had a really big score, but that's not happening every week. Nah,
for sure. But there will be games where he kicks bags. That's the thing. Massimo D'Ambrosio had 92 points. He's playing on the wing. Like, his good scores are few and far between. You probably want him on that half-back line where players like Amon are scoring type thing, but he's just not getting it. But I think with someone like D'Ambrosio, he's just going to be on that wing. His scoring's going to fluctuate. I think it does help Amon, because I think when he was out or getting subbed out, Amon will move up to the wing and just be a bit nothing.
The issue with the Hawks right now is, from a fantasy perspective, I actually don't think it's an issue on field. They've dropped that slow ball movement. So that was why we were getting so many high scores from Massimo,
sideways,
from Amon, that they're really aggressive now.
Yeah.
Their pressure around the ball is electric, which is exactly why Port Adelaide capitulated early on. They're happy to kind of transition with a bit of dare. So that probably hurts their scoring a little bit, but it makes them funner to watch.
Do you agree with Kane Corns that Sam Mitchell is the best coach in the competition?
I don't know about best coach in the competition. Clearly he hasn't been watching a lot of Sydney, but I do think he doesn't get as much credit as he kind of deserves, Sam Mitchell. Like, if you look at the record since he's come on board, they haven't really fallen away. And arguably the way that they're looking and the wins they've already had, they will improve this season and probably reach 7 to 8 victories.
Yeah, and he's done it with, like, being pretty aggressive in terms of the rebuild, getting rid of some senior players, stuff like that as well. So,
I think they haven't totally bottomed out, which they should have. So he's done pretty well to turn that list around pretty quickly.
Again, you probably wish you do bottom out with Tassie coming in, but anyway, just stock up on those draft picks, but whatever. Onto the West Coast versus Melbourne game. A bit of a shock here. Feel for the Melbourne supporters.
Well, I mentioned in the Port call, I was like, Port Adelaide have put off this amazing heist, and now they're going to be a game outside the 4.
Yeah,
because I just assumed Melbourne would win, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's an unfair call though. Yeah. Like, I think most 99% of people out there thought that would have happened,
which means Port went from 9th to 4th and purely off West Coast performance.
Yeah, 100%. We had a bit of a Jake Waterman saga a few weeks ago. I think 3 weeks ago we said don't read into his form. Now he's going to win the Coleman.
He's going to get close. Yeah.
He's already too good for the podcast. But I want to know your opinions. Do you think he'd be a sell high candidate? How do you think he's going to go in future years? Or do you see him being like a Kerno type forward that can average 80 plus most seasons?
Word out west is they've been very impressed with how he's come along. Obviously it's happened on the field and we can see that, but behind closed doors, the work that he's been putting in, the confidence he's now got, he's probably the next Jack Darling. So the plan obviously is Oscar Allen will come back, and then you've got your Twin Towers back up there for West Coast once again, and your Kennedy Darling now being Waterman and Allen. So the next question is, when another big body like Oscar gets in there, how do they go with those leading lanes? Do they get in each other's path? Is he going to be the primary target? Probably not, which means he's not going to have that massive ceiling of 5-6 goals regularly. Like I ran the numbers today in the build up to Adelaide West Coast on Sunday, that I think he's kicked more. So his career best total in a season, he's kicked more than that in the last 5 weeks. He's had something like 28 goals in 5 games. It's insane what he's been able to do. It's just not it's just not reliable, is it? Like, you can't keep doing that. At some point, it's got to come back down, and that'll probably be when Oscar returns.
So would you be selling high on him if you owned him? Or would you be backing him in?
Again, it totally depends on your league. So if you're quite deep with forwards and the options are limited, just hold, because he's a good forward, and he's still going to be a 70+ guy. If there's other players around and you think you can get something good, sell high, because I don't see him be a hundreds guy like we've been seeing this past month.
He's the type of player I could see like him being like an extra. Like, people keep maybe their 5-4s not expecting someone like him to be in their top 5, so they do have a 5th floating around and stuff like that. So you might be able to trade him out for a middle or something like that.
He's a better option than Max King, I'll say that. And that's not from a potential on field. Like, a King will obviously be a great forward. But from a fantasy perspective, Waterman just finds more of the footy. He's better contested. So I like him.
Again, I played Max King 2 weeks before this, 2 weeks in a row, thinking he'd beat up on your North Melbournes and stuff like that, and was lucky to put up a 50 most of those times. Can't get a
ground ball.
Yeah, that's the thing. And St Kilda, just a bit of a
bit of a rabble.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack Darling was the other one you mentioned in there. He had under 11 points, kicked 3 goals, just a tip of the cap. Just has to kick goals to score, and it's just not going to happen as regularly. Although West Coast, maybe over in the West, they might be putting up some more consistent performances going forward. Wait and see. Jamie Cripps is the other one, 105 points. Like, it's his best score of the year, but he's been serviceable all year. Like, a lot of those 70 type scores could do worse. Do you think like someone like Petrocelli being out just helps him just eat up a few more points in that forward line? Or
32-year-old as well, so like he's nearing the end of his career. So almost a senior leader. I can't see anyone taking his spot, which is handy. Like, even if you look at the performance on Sunday, the bottom end of West Coast 23 had a lot of guys that didn't do a lot. So, Jamie Cripps is still going to be that senior player that will get a lot of the footy purely because he's trustworthy and can direct traffic. So, I don't mind him as a little option for a 1-year punt, but keep a perspective. I wouldn't worry about him.
Yeah, no, not a future option, but he might be a handy, just to trade in for depth for those teams that are contending. Brady Hoff, though, speaking of players that would be good for the future, 93 points. It was just good to see him put up a good score. Plays the right role for fantasy. I wasn't really sure why. Like, he scored so well. Probably just the game suited him, the matchup and whatever.
He's got really good footy smarts as well. The issue, I guess, when we saw him, even when he started, was just getting a bit more mass on him. So he's a bit more competitive, because he does get smashed in contested defensive one-on-ones.
I think last week he went out injured or almost got subbed out because he got smashed.
Heavy, but from a footy perspective, he knows what he's doing, where to be around the ground, and how to find a lot of the ball. So that's the next natural step, is to just get a bigger body.
If someone like Yo does move on, that probably clears a path for Duggan in the midfield a lot more. And then he could be, the main guy across that half-back flank as well. Harley Reid, I just wanted to touch on this. Only the 79 points, but people say he's going to be super coach only, but my goodness, the quality is there. I think he just needs to lift the volume of touches he gets, and being a first-year player, that's going to go up.
It's a funny one, because I sound like a broken record, but everyone always referred to him as the next Dustin Martin. And I was like, no, he'll be his own player. He's still very damaging around stoppage and he'll break away, but it's not just the fend-offs. I get that that's a mirror image of Dusty, but
some of those were awesome.
It's just how damaging he is out of the middle, and the ability to hit the scoreboard. He has all the makings of what we saw in Dustin Martin, which is a guy that at his best from a fantasy perspective was 100 averaging player. So like, Harley Reid will get there, and get there quickly, and he's going to have the odd game where he doesn't have as many touches as you touched on, because he's more like 20 touches, 3 goals. But there's going to be games where he has 30 and he leads the way for West Coast, and it's going to happen very quickly.
There was all this talk earlier on in the season. Who do I take with my first pick? Is it Reid? Is it McKercher? Is it Sanders? And like, if you got any of those guys right now, you'd be super happy. I think there's no problem.
And they're all so good in their own right. Because McKercher, that halfback role is, so fruitful for points, but he will eventually rotate through the middle.
He'd be like
Sanders is a contested beast, so his tackling is going to be great, and he's a very high disposal winner.
Could be like a Jack Steele type.
Harley Reid's the everyman. He can be anything on any given day.
So, you'd be happy with any of those. So, I'm hoping some of those people that were so worried about their first-round picks are at ease now. The other one's Alex Neil-Bullen, 86 points on the weekend, kicked a goal, but he's moved into the midfield a lot more recently. I didn't check up on his numbers. I meant to, Dave. I remember last week he had a huge number because Petrarca went forward, and I think in this game as well, he spent some more time in the midfield too.
27%, I reckon.
So a bit less on the 52% he had last week, but still, that's his second highest attended game in the midfield for for the season. So just another one to look at. And if coaches aren't paying attention, you might be able to get a sneaky trade in
Melbourne
there.
are all over the shop, aren't they? Like the Petrarca forward role, like they kind of need it because that forward line isn't functioning without him.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's opened up opportunities in the midfield, but they're not as imposing as they used to be there.
Yeah.
Like Neil Bullen's great as the outside run and penetrating kick into the 50, but you'd want Christian in there.
Yeah. The thing is, like 2 weeks ago, like I thought Melbourne had no issues, like they were looking prime, and it's just how things can flip so quickly, and it's the same deal for fantasy players as well. Like Petrarca probably goes back into the midfield next week, and if Neil Bullen goes forward again, and everything goes back to normal. So
the weird one of the game over the weekend was Thomas Barrow. So like he's consistently been almost the fourth guy in, and didn't see a single centre bounce on the weekend, and that probably is why Neil Bullen got to go. Salem came back as well, and he saw some.
Yeah.
So that was a weird one that for a young guy who pretty much had played the Clayton Oliver role for a long period of last year, just to be ceremonially dumped out of the blue because a superstar came back who usually plays in the back line. I don't really know what happened there.
Yeah, well, that happened earlier on the season, then Sparrow was missing out, so it's just so strange. I think they're just trying everything at the moment and just trying to find their best mix for going forward.
Which is a side that played in a grand final and won a premiership a few years ago, like just really lost.
And you speak about like the lack of forward options for them, but they didn't have any in that season they won the flag either. So
Bailey Fritsch was their go-to guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is almost a smaller tool.
Yeah, like I understand opposition teams now pay more attention to players like him, but you just got to figure it out. And I don't know. That's probably why I'm not an AFL coach.
Brown was never the answer.
Yeah, never the answer. That's it for the round rewind. Just reading out the rest of the gold members for the week. Thank you to Ben Strawn, Aidan Wedge, James Unsworth, Matt Turkic, Paul Dunn, Craig Middleditch, Tim McAuliffe, Jesse Strouch, Sam Cullen, WG, Charlie Lowe, Rahul Base, Samuel Walker, Adrian Street, Dale Young, and Daniel O'Brien. All right, we've got about 10 minutes to go, so we'll push through the questions. Didn't get a heap of questions this week, so it should be over pretty quickly. But first question comes from P-Rex. What are your thoughts on God himself, Paddy Dow? Dropped 50-something points in the first half and then less than 10 in the second. We have a lot of new listeners this year, so a lot of people coming over from TikTok and stuff like that. So if you've never checked out the Paddy Dow song before, do yourself a favour. It's some of Doss's finest work.
He's almost a cult figure amongst the fantasy community, isn't he?
Oh, from that video, definitely. What are your thoughts on Paddy Dow and his like midfield, potential at St Kilda? What do you think?
I'm not totally sold. We'll give him some leeway in the sense that he's been playing a lot of VFL footy and finally gets a senior go. And you're right, 50-something points in the first half is excellent, and then faded away, probably conditioning. But the issue at the Saints is that Brad Crouch is coming back soon. They're really not sold on their midfield mix, which is hurting them over this past month. That's the reason they're chasing Luke Davies-Uniacke. Jack Steele is their only kind of good mid, and Windhager's coming along to an extent, but still very young. So, Dow will get opportunities this year, but Crouch will be back by the time the buys get going, and then he probably drops down to interchange or sub, and we're back to the Paddy Dow we know and love.
Yeah, exactly. But I will say his first half did look bloody good, so I was getting pretty excited there for a while. But I think it just coincides with the St Kilda side as well. They fell away, and players just fall away.
Filippo's another one that Ross just hasn't given the keys to, and at some point needs to give him a go, or he's going to leave. He still hasn't signed on, and South Australian boy who people will come asking.
Absolutely. So, interesting one. But, I think it's a wait and see with Paddy Dow, as it always is. Ben Blake asks, and you're the perfect person for this one, being a Richmond supporter, is Jaden Short finished? What's going on with him?
Perfect person because I own him as well. I brought him in 2 weeks ago thinking, gee, this guy's underpriced, and he has been miserable.
Yep.
It's not even so much the lack of kick-ins, but he just used to... It's an attitude thing.
Yeah.
Richmond are just doing poorly, and the ball is coming in that defence hot all the time. He should at least be able to get some marks and +6s across the half-back line coming out of what is usually a behind.
Yeah.
But... there's just no run from him. He doesn't seem to be eager to try and force any sort of ball.
He's not used to being down and out. When he kind of broke into the side, Richmond were just on the up. It was just after kind of Bashahuli.
And there was some talk as well after the game on the weekend that the senior leaders at the Tigers are a bit unsure what the ball movement plan actually is under Uze, which is very worrying.
Yeah, that is worrying.
The coaching staff need to clarify what the game plan actually is. So maybe there's a bit of that they just don't know where to be positionally.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids out there still fresh, but short, I just kind of thought a guy that's usually reliable for an 80+ to get him in at a basement price, he just hasn't backed it up. He's gotten worse.
As an owner, are you holding or are you looking to offload and get whatever you can?
Sexton this week. Yeah, that's a pretty easy move for
What
me.
about in like keeper leagues and stuff like that, where you're probably not going to get that sort of deal?
I've got him in my keeper league in AFL Fantasy, and he still starts because I think the potential to have a high ceiling game is still there.
Yeah,
he's going to be unreliable.
His value's just way too low to trade a player like that as well.
My back four in this keeper league that I'm currently in, I've got Sicily, Nick Martin, Nick Blakey, and Jaden Short. And the next best in is like Chase Jones or Isaac Quaynor. It's like you've just got to. He's still got the potential
as
to
your
be
fourth
a premium
defender. Like that's you can carry
you just
that.
got to keep it.
Yeah, it depends what the makeup of your team is, but like I never sell low on these guys because it just always comes back to bite you. I'd rather just run them into the ground and watch them retire on you.
Yeah,
but
just use him as a loop option.
Yeah, exactly.
Just play him off the bench.
Yeah. Then rather than someone else reaping the rewards for it, and you're not going to get anything back anyway. Jason Miller's asking some DPP projections. Travis Boak we flagged earlier on in the program. Liam Henry's been playing forward a little bit more as well. There's like a few players that are going to be handy. Like I'm finding this season forward mids and defensive mids so handy because I'm struggling to fill out my midfield line.
Yeah.
Like there's just nothing on the waiver wires. All the mids have gone. But like I can throw someone like Jai Caldwell into my midfield and I've got enough 70 average kind of forward type guys, or like, Jace Burgoyne's another one who will get mid status. And to throw someone like him, my team is just all made up of DPP players except for like my main three midfielders really. And it's working well because if people are injured or whatever, I'm not struggling to find players like the rest of my league is. I think they're worth actually. Used to think someone getting mid status, who cares? But I think it's way more valuable this season given the depth of mids. When I think a lot of leagues used to play utilities as well, where no one really plays utilities. Well, you can't play utilities anymore. Filling out those 7 mids in every team in the AFL Fantasy format, it's a bit trickier.
Just pulled up the list. So, Boak mid forward, Archie mid forward, Carroll mid forward, Jack Williams will get ruck, but not worth your investment. Yeah. The Richards and Burgoyne one's getting mid probably doesn't help you, but at least it's handy.
Oh, it helps. Burgoyne, I've got Burgoyne, that helps me.
Yeah. And then Ainsworth's going to get mid forward as well. Yeah. So it's not.
He's playing on the wing a fair
probably
bit.
the biggest headline there. Otherwise, Richards and Burgoyne handy, but doesn't, from a classic perspective, I guess you're not chasing those guys in a midfield sense.
It's not going to be like a big, effective one like the last lot was. I think we got most of the big ones out of the way.
And we're just kind of crying out for more forwards and it just hasn't come.
Yeah, definitely. And the last one's Ryan Mills, Mitch Owens worth keeping.
Let's have a look at some of his numbers.
He showed some glimpses on the weekend. I think he kicked 2 goals early on in the game, and then you just see this young player who's such a unique type of player as well. He could be a key forward. They use him as a ruckman sometimes, which is crazy. But I think long term he needs to be an inside midfielder, and it's just biding his time until he's at that level. What is he, 30 years?
He's got a good
now?
Patrick Cripps kind of size to him, 191.
That's true, yeah, exactly.
90 kilos. So, put on a little bit more mass and he could be around the mark. But he's dropped off a little bit in terms of his fantasy. Early in the year, he wasn't hitting the scoreboard as comfortably, and his disposal numbers are slightly down. So,
and St Kilda are just worse off. That's the thing. A lot of it's just to do with the form of the team as well. So
I'm not sure about Mitch. Again, it entirely depends on your situation. I think if you're in a smaller draft or keeper league, then you can probably afford to let him go.
Yeah.
If it's depth, quite deep, just hold.
Depends where your team's situated. Like in a dynasty league, I've got him, and I've won 2 out of the last 3 flags, and it's probably time I start the rebuild. And I'm holding on to him, no worries. I'm happy with that sort of stuff. If you're in a shallower league, again, if you're a contender, maybe someone you drop. If you are down the bottom, someone worth keeping, I think. It all just depends on the situation.
He's only 20, so...
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, potential's there.
Yeah, and could be anything, literally could be anything. All right, that'll do. That's coming right up to the hour mark now, so perfect timing. Thank you so much for... I've been trying to get you in the studio for, 4, 5, 6 weeks now.
I've got to apologise to listeners and you because I I've got the flu in 3 of the last 4 weeks for some reason. So it's just that time of year, I think.
No, I've said to you how like remarkable it was you actually got through the game last weekend.
Well, the draw was when I picked it up. And it literally got a head cold in the second half. I noticed
in that game you just went missing for a big chunk of it, and I was actually thinking like, he isn't really doing much here. Like, what's going on?
I had to go back and listen to make sure it sounded okay on air. Basically, every time I turned my mic off, I'd go have a big sneeze or something.
No, I did notice you were probably doing a bit less than you usually do. So all good, mate.
We survived.
It's good to get you in here and get some AFL fantasy content out there. Anyways, listen to ABC Grandstand Saturday mornings and your commentary. Is that the only times you're on? Or
so Saturdays at 11 here in South Australia, which you can hear around the country. Listen up if you want to hear any kind of Crows Power stuff. We get heavily into that. And otherwise, any games at the Adelaide Oval, I'll be there. So the next one is Adelaide and West Coast to wrap up round 11 on Sunday.
Yep. So, make sure you're tuning into the ABC for those there. And, get around our stuff on all the socials at Keeper League Pod. You'll find us all over the internet. Do a Google on whatever platform you want to find us on, and you'll find us there. Don't have to mention all the handles each week. But anyway, thank you to all the people that have listened this week. If you want to support the show, make sure you sign up as a member. Get around our sponsors, Game Day Squad. Download the app, sign up, make a team. Enter the competition to win some packs and have a bit of fun there. Thanks, listeners. We'll talk to you next week.